Hello, and welcome to Warhammer 40k's Grim History from Beyond. I'm Zekthar.
And I'm Yuxin.
We are the chroniclers of all that was, and all that will be in the 41st millennium. We've seen the rise and fall of many empires, and this month we will be discussing the backbone of the Imperium of Man, the Astra Militarum.
That's right, Sektar. And this week we'll be discussing 3 regiments of renown throughout the galaxy for their stubbornness and courage in the face of overwhelming odds.
Indeed, Yuxin. And this week we'll be starting with the Praetorian Guard.
Interesting. Are they like the personal guard of the Roman emperors on Terran 42?
Not even a little bit.
Oh.
The Praetorian Guard regiments of the Astra Militarum actually got their name from the world they're from, Pretoria. And I know, Yuxin, very original, but that's the Imperium for you. Located in the Segmentum Tempestus naval base of Baca, the hives of Pretoria are noted for their squalor and degradation, where everything, even the air, is rationed and where even the most minor infringements of the law can lead to the most draconian of punishments. The huge population of this world are little more than slave labor, who toil in massive manufactorum complexes. Through the Praetorian masses, endless toil, and the aid of large merchant fleets, which trade across the Segmentum, Pretoria, or at least her rulers, are amongst the richest in the Imperium. The Imperial Guard regiments raised on Pretoria are renowned for their iron discipline and bravery. They detest slavenness and disorder, and even in the midst of the fiercest battle, will ensure their ranks are correctly dressed in parade ground fashion and uniforms smartly fastened. The planetary lords of Pretoria hold it is only through fearsome training and draconian punishments for the most minor infringements that the hive-toughened inhabitants of their planet can be made to follow orders and do as they are told. Whatever one's views on the training methods used, they seem to work, producing troops that are as ferocious on the attack as they are determined in defense. The Praetorians fight in a similar way to the Mordian Iron Guard, which we will be discussing next week, using concentrated volley fire to eliminate the enemy in vast droves. Now, the Praetorian uniform typically consists of a scarlet tunic and epaulets, and dark blue trousers with a vertical scarlet stripe on the outside leg. The pith helmet is worn as headgear. In fact, their uniform has an eerie similarity to Terran 42's British forces during the late 1800s.
Interesting. But tell me this, Sektar. What battle are they most known for?
Well, unfortunately, the Praetorians are known for the massacre at Bigto River, which was a disastrous battle that occurred during the Montar campaign on the Imperial world of Montar 7. You see, when an ancient space hulk entering the Montar system in the Segmentum Tempestus, little notice was taken at its passing until it disgorged a massive orc warg, led by the mighty greenskin warlord Bolgarg, that launched an assault on the desolate world of Montar 7. Claiming it for his own, Bolgarg was determined to conquer every world within the Montar system and carve out his own little orc empire. Now, needless to say, the orc landing did not go unnoticed, and soon the planetary governor Kinwa on Montar Prime urgently requested aid from the Imperium to deal with the orcs before they spread mayhem and destruction throughout the star system. Although preliminary reports indicated that the orc tribe was of no great strength, Lord Kinwa simply did not have the forces to deal with them. The total human and abhuman population of the entire Montar system numbered less than 700 individuals. And the Lord Kinwa's planetary defense force consisted of an understrength platoon with only 3 heavy weapons and no armored vehicles. So, real quick, Yuxin, that's got to be like the smallest group of peoples I think I've heard about in the Imperium.
Well, let's look at it this way. It seems like they are a average system, right?
An average system? What do you mean?
Well, like an average world, about maybe 10% technically actually are supposed to be in the guard sort of system, it seems like.
I would think less than that if there's only 700 people in the
Which
whole
means
system.
it would come to 70 people fighting.
Well, you're talking about their planetary defense force?
Yeah.
Was 70 people? Yeah. Okay, that kind of makes sense. But still, I mean, Nocturne has more people on it than this whole system. I mean, that's kind of saying something. Anyways, fortunately, though, for Lord Kinwell, his appeal for help was received and acted upon very quickly, perhaps too quickly as things turned out. The Montar system lies in the Segmentum Tempestus, close to the planet of Talon. Now, Imperial Guard forces in this sector were under the control of Lord Commander Sheridan, who had recently completed a successful campaign against a renegade Eldar pirate fleet. The campaign had been a long and bloody one, a running battle fought in half a dozen different star systems and on more than 30 worlds, which had ended with the destruction of the Eldar renegades by the Imperial Navy. Reports of this final battle were coming in when Sheridan received news of the Orc invasion of Montar 7, and may be that his elation over the victory against the renegade Eldar clouded his judgment about how he would deal with Warlord Bolgarg. Whatever the reason, Sheridan trusted the preliminary reconnaissance reports and decided to dispatch a small force to deal with the Orcs as quickly as possible. The troops that he sent were the veterans of the campaign against the Dark Eldar, the 24th Praetorian Guard. The Praetorian 24th had lived up well to the traditions of the fighting reputation of their homeworld, but had suffered very heavy casualties in doing so. Of the 1,500 troops that had left Pretoria, only about 300 now remained. More importantly, all of the regiment's senior officers had been killed. The most senior officer left alive, in fact, was an acting commander of the regiment, was the 21-year-old Captain Glean of C Company. To overcome these deficiencies for the campaign against Warlord Bolgarg, the 24th was hastily reinforced with the survivors of the 135th Talon Desert Raiders. But they had all been destroyed in the battles against the Eldar renegades. Crucially, the commander of the Talons, Colonel Altair I, was put in overall command of the reinforced Praetorian 24th, even though the bulk of the troops in the regiment were Praetorians. It was a command structure that was to have disastrous consequences for the regiment, thus supposedly replenished adequately. The 24th Praetorian was dispatched immediately to Montar 7 with orders from Lord Sheridan to act quickly to eliminate the Orc threat to the SAW system. Information was still sketchy about the size and strength of the Orc tribe, but the common consensus was that they were fairly few in number and lacking any heavy support in the form of gargants or battle fortresses. Orc Blood Axe mercenaries, hired as scouts by the Imperial Guard during the campaign, confirmed that although they had never actually met Warlord Bolgarg, the Imperials had nothing to worry about, for Bolgarg was considered a minor threat. When the Praetorian 24th made planetfall on Montar 7, Colonel Alterai lost no time in moving against the Orcs. Suborbital spycraft had pinpointed the Orc camp at a location on the Bigto River. Orc numbers were still unknown, though, the pall of smoke hanging over the settlement making it impossible for the Imperial spycraft to get any readings on Orc numbers. But worryingly, there were signs that the Orcs were in the process of constructing gargants and other large engines of war. Colonel Alteray determined to act swiftly, as instructed by his orders from Lord Sheridan, but he refused to take the advice of Captain Glean, who suggested his company's blood axes to scout the Orc camp. Alteray didn't trust the blood axes one bit, especially in an operation against their own kind, and in any case, his orders specifically instructed him to act with extreme prejudice, and this he was determined to do so. Less than 24 hours after arriving on the planet, the Praetorians 24th moved against the Orcs. Alterai split the regiment into 3 columns. The first was called Kaz-Tir, consisting of the Talon Rough Rider companies and all the Talon armored companies, under the command of Captain M. Kaz-Tir of Talern. The second column, Force Glen, consisted of the Company C and the 24th Praetorians. The third company, Force Ter-I, was commanded by Al-Ter-I himself and consisted of Company A and all the regiment's support weapons. Al-Ter-I's plan was to use Force Kaz-Ter to smash into the Orc camp in a devastating surprise attack. As the Imperial tanks piled into the Orcs, Force Glen, all of which were mounted in fast-moving chimeras, would sweep round the Orc camp, blocking off the Orcs' retreat and cutting down those Greensons that tried to escape. By the time that Al-Ter-I and the rest of the regiment's slower-moving troops arrived, all that remained to be done would be the mop-up. It was not a bad plan, but it relied on the Orcs being too weak to fight back effectively against Force Kaz-Tir.
I guess sneaky suspicion that this isn't going to be the case.
Yes, well, as the Imperial troops crested the hills that overlooked the Orc camp, Al-Ter-I's plan had already started to fall apart. Force Kaztir had pulled ahead of the rest of the regiment and started to cross the Bigto River before Force Glen could get into position. Captain Kaztir was a brilliant but headstrong commander who had proven his bravery, if not his common sense, in many battles. Always before, when he took a gamble, his luck had paid off. But as the Lehman Russ tank spearheaded his attack across the Big Tooth River, Kaztir's luck finally ran out. Suddenly, from out of the orc camp, there poured dozens of snakebite boar boys, closely followed by hundreds of orc warriors and their smaller Gretchen cousins. Super heavy weapon batteries mounted in the watchtowers of the orc town burst into action and started blasting away at the surprised Imperial troops. And then, as this torrent of greenskin destruction smashed Force Kaztir's front, the reeling guardsmen were hit by an even heavier volume of fire from the rear. As tanks exploded and men died, the guardsmen stared in horror and disbelief as the gargant that they believed still was under construction lumbered over the horizon, flanked on either side by huge battle fortresses, bristling with blazing guns, and supported by orc fighter bombers overhead. Within moments, Captain Kaztir was dead, while the panic-stricken survivors of the forces that he had led did what they could to escape. Many of the Talaran Rough Riders attached to the column survived the initial bombardment, and they now tried to escape back over the Big Tooth River and away from the orc settlement. Unfortunately, the steep banks of the far side of the river slowed their escape, and within moments, the pursuing snakebite boar boys of the Blood Hands tribe caught up with them. The result was a massacre. As was quickly becoming clear, the Imperial force had walked into an ambush, masterminded by Warlord Bulgog, whose scouts had let him know about the arrival of the Imperial Guard from the moment they had landed on the planet. Bulgog's ambush was hardly original or even well executed, but when combined with Al-Tarai's fatally flawed plan, it led to a disaster for the Praetorian 24th. It is estimated that within 3 minutes of the trap being sprung, Force Kaztir had suffered 85% casualties. But the disaster was not yet over, for above the river valley, Force Glen was also under attack. From the bluff overlooking the river, Captain Glen could do little to help his comrades below, for almost at the same moment that Kaztir came under attack, his company had been ambushed by a huge force of orc buggies. The orcs had appeared from nowhere, quickly surrounding the Praetorians and forcing them from their chimeras. Glen formed the vehicles into a circle, from behind which the grim red-coated soldiers under his command prepared to sell their lives as dearly as possible. All knew that they were doomed, for having dealt with Force Kaztir, the hundreds of orc boys and the huge war engines that accompanied them were turning their attention to the homies that be left on the hill. As the orcs swarmed up the hill, the Praetorians hit them with volley after volley of tightly controlled lasgun fire, while the multi-lasers of the chimeras cut bloody swaths through the orcs' ranks. Soon the slopes around the guardsmen were surrounded by hundreds of orcs' corpses and blazing buggies. But still the orcs kept coming, supported by withering fire from the gargant and battle fortresses. Yelling their guttural battle cries, and with a complete disregard for their own safety that impressed even the battle-hardened warriors from the Hives Pretoria, the orc warriors hurled themselves again and again at the rapidly shrinking circle of guardsmen, until finally there were no humans left alive. Within an hour of first spotting the massive orc camp, every single member of Forces Kaztir and Force Glen, with the exception of one of Company C's Orc Blood Axe mercenary, was dead. Colonel Tarai had no option but to pull back in the face of the victorious orc army. Fortunately for the troops under his command, the orcs' pursuit was desultory at best. The orcs were too busy celebrating their victory to be bothered with chasing the few beaten survivors, and they were able to escape more or less unscathed. Colonel Tarai was never to be given an independent command again. He died 10 years later, making a lone attack on a Tyranid dominatrix. It is said his last words were, "Let me go to my fate, brothers. I must have peace from the ghosts that haunt me." Now, Warlord Bulgog, on the other hand, went on to found a successful orc empire in the Montage system, but then disappeared along with most of his followers on board an orc space hulk. It was assumed that the craft was destroyed in the warp, but no one could be certain. Lord Sheridan recovered from the setback and went on to conquer the Montar system from the orcs that had remained after Bulgarg had left. In the forefront of the campaign was the newly raised 24th Praetorian Guard. Quite the tale there, Euxin.
Yeah. First off, what part of that did he think was a good idea?
Where? What are you talking about?
Let's put together two completely opposite tradition units.
Well, okay. Altarai's plan, it wasn't actually a bad plan. It was just,
No, I'm talking about
unfortunately,
Sherdon.
oh, Sherdon. It was probably just one of those kind of like, well, I don't think there's a whole lot of these guys, so we'll just kind of lump a bunch of people together and just have them take care of it.
Screw the fact that they have pretty much opposite traditions and doctrine and everything.
Well, I figured they probably would work pretty well together. I mean, you'd have the Praetorians, obviously, anyways. They would be your mainline infantry, and they would just march forward. And then you have your Talon Desert Raiders that can swing in on your flanks. I mean, it's definitely workable. But I think, quite frankly, anyways, the biggest problem in this whole thing was that no one took the time to figure out how many of them there were.
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest problem. This seems to be, by the way, from all the stuff that we've been researching about the Imperial Guard, this seems to be a reoccurring problem for the Imperial Guard.
Lack of recon.
Yeah, lack of recon or even bothering to do it. That's the other thing, too.
Yeah.
I mean, a good example is this, anyways. It's like, well, it's foggy, so we can't see, anyways, the ground. It's like, well, we can wait a few days, you know? I'm sure the fog will eventually lift. Then, if it did, they could take a look at it and go, oh, holy crap, there's a boatload of these guys.
Well, in that case, they already had the idea that, oh, we got it, because they still thought the Gargant was under construction. Oh, we need to get in there as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I get that. I would rather, anyways, risk the chance of having to fight a Gargant as opposed to kind of what took place.
Yeah, well, and I would have probably followed the advice of the captain saying, how about we send in the Orc Blood Axe mercenaries to see what they find out.
The very least, go to send them in anyways and send some of your own scouts with them so that while they kind of go into the town, your scouts at least you got eyes on the ground. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Not only that, but I mean, there's nothing wrong anyways with placing a few scouts before you even start a battle.
Yeah.
Because that way they can at least radio back and go, yeah, no, dude, back off. This is not a good idea.
It seems to be missing giant mechanical things.
Yeah. Remember all that stuff they said that they were building? They've already built it. This isn't going to work.
I don't see it.
Yeah, it disappeared. There can only mean one of two things. Either A, they scrapped it to rebuild it again, which is probably not very likely, or two, it's wandering around somewhere.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and like I said, this has been a reoccurring process. I mean, when we were talking about the Vostroyans last week, that whole, we're here to fight rebels, and all of a sudden they just run into a giant orc. I don't think these are rebels, sir. I mean, that whole thing, anyways. It's just, it seems like this is a reoccurring process. The Imperial Guard just does not like to try to figure things out before they do it. Now, I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that they don't care. I mean, sure, they lost 1,500 soldiers here, but I mean, that's just, that's not even a drop in a bucket compared to how many Imperial Guardsmen you have. I mean, yes, it sucked for all the guys anyways that died, but we don't care. We've got 50 million more where they came from.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing that's one of the main reasons they don't do as much recon, but I don't know. What do you think?
I think it was just poorly planned out on Sherdon's point of view, and then also down the line with everything else, actually. I mean, the idea behind the plan would make sense, but you also have to take it from this point of view. Well, these people must have not faced orcs before.
Why do you say that?
First of all, because saying that there isn't going to be many of them, that's like, you'd have to be stupid to think that.
There's got to be places. There's got to be places that only have a few orcs on the planet. I mean, I'm sure that there are places like that that's got like one little town, and there's like 50 of them there.
Right. Generally, that's a
so-
place that had been run over by the Imperial Guard, and they've just slowly started popping up again. Not a group that has invaded via a space Hulk.
Depends on how big the Hulk is, too. I mean, Hulks kind of range in size, right? To the, quite frankly, the ginormous to not very big, right? The Space Hulk is
Generally,
just
they're
something that
pretty
floats through the world.
big to begin with, and then they can just be massive.
Yeah. Well, but what do you think of the Praetorian Guard in and of themselves? I mean, we kind of talked about this battle. Yes. I think we both agree anyways that it was just kind of, if they had just taken a little bit of time to figure out anyways what was going on before they went charging in head first, it probably wouldn't have ended the way it did. But nobody did, and everybody died. But other than that, what do you think of the Praetorian Guard?
I think that they do sound very much like the 1800s, late 1700s, early 1800 British soldiers.
Right. All monocled up with
bright colors.
Yeah.
Plan on winning via massive fire.
Well, it sounds like they're pretty good. They're pretty good shots too. But yeah, I hear you. For those, anyways, that are listening on the podcast, they really do. Honestly, if you've ever seen the movie Terran 42 movie Rourke's Drift, they pretty much look like that. Very 1800s British military. I mean, they still, anyways, they still have back from the 1700s. They're still kind of the lobster backs. They still have the bright red uniforms, but now they have like a helmet that kind of comes down just to about to where their nose is. And well, the Brits also had, at that point anyways, it was a single shot rifle that was pretty hefty caliber. It wasn't a musket at that point. It was a shell, but I can't remember what they used, but they were like, you could put a quarter size hole in a man. I mean, it was a pretty hefty round, let's put it that way. But anyways, moving on to probably one of the more famous and probably a lot of people's favorite regiment, and that would be the Death Korps of the Krieg. And I believe you looked them up, yes, Huxon?
Yeah. Okay. Well, the Death Korps of Krieg are Imperial Guard regiments raised from the world of, obviously, Krieg. Notoriously grim and fatalistic.
I'm sensing a theme here, Huxon.
Yes. Bustroyan firstborns.
The Tanith. Where are the
Praetorian Guards. Tanith. Mordians. Hadians.
We're going to eventually find one anyways, and it's going to be like, I don't know, like the Milwaukee Swamp Rats. Where are they from? They're from Mordecai. Wait, what? That doesn't make any sense. Aren't they supposed to be like the Mordecai or Swamp Rats? No, ironically, they went with Milwaukee. Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry. Go ahead.
They're notoriously grim and fatalistic warriors and seek to atone for their planet's past rebellion by dying glorious deaths in service to the Imperium. Now, Zekthar, you may ask what the Krieg did to warner such thoughts in the mind of their soldiers.
Oh, okay. It better be worse than what the Bustroyans did.
Oh, but it was.
Oh, okay, good.
You see, the planet Krieg was previously a prosperous hive world of billions located in Segmentum Tempestus, specializing in manufacture and trade, and led by a council of autocrats. However, as time passed, the debauched and decadent autocrats began to become paranoid that an outside threat would take their power away from them, and thus began to increasingly fortify the world from outside threats. Eventually, the autocrats also began to resent the influence of the administratum on a planet that they considered to be their own. Eventually, in 433.m40, the High Autocrat declared himself independent from the Imperium and renounced the Emperor as his divine master. Civil war broke out on Krieg, and much of the planet quickly fell to the rebels.
You mean separatists, correct?
Yep.
Okay.
Except for High Felgrad, which was under the command of the now infamous Colonel Jordan of the Krieg 83rd Imperial Guard Regiment, under the strict orders to not let Krieg fall, but in the knowledge that no fleet on the scale needed to relieve them was available. Jurgen decided that Krieg would either belong to the Emperor or to no one. On the day of the Feast of the Emperor's Ascension, Jurgen unleashed a counterattack of atomic cleansing in what became known as the Purging. For days, Krieg was engulfed in a sea of nuclear fire, resulting in a total collapse of its ecosystem and subsequent nuclear winter. But the Civil War dragged on. The survivors from the Purging would fight on, but were forced to exist in underground bunkers or deep in the radioactive chem wastes, as their descendants do to this day. From the self-annihilation of their homeworld, Loyalist troops slowly retook their world, inch by inch, over the course of 500 years, until finally returning to the imperial rule in 949.40. It would be from this cataclysmic event that the Death Korps of Krieg was born. As a result of this cataclysmic civil war, Krieg itself remains a barren and death world, racked by radiation storms and uninhabitable toxicity levels. Much of the population growth on Krieg is undertaken by the Vitae Womb system.
I hate to ask, but what's the Vita Womb?
Well, that's up to debate. But what we do know is the Vita Womb is a method of genetic reproduction utilized by the scientists of Krieg to keep the planet's population up on their dying world in order to meet their tithes for the imperial god. Mysterious and little understood technique outside the Krieg itself, this technology of mass-producing human organisms is seen as abhorrent to the Adeptus Mechanicus. Nonetheless, the practice is tolerated as the Death Korps of Krieg are so vital to the imperial war effort. The Krieg has returned to imperial rule with little fanfare or regard. The Departamento Munitorum took note. Krieg was in debt, so a new tithe of men for the Imperial Guard was placed upon it. The Munitorum adepts were surprised when the Krieg authorities offered them not one, but 20 regiments for immediate deployment, all formed, trained, and equipped, and each commander requested the most hazardous Imperial war zones available. Now, this telling seems to be missing some pieces of information and perspective.
Yeah, you don't say. I did want to say something, but why don't you go ahead and fill us in on what's missing here, Yuxin?
Certainly. Well, first of all, this original story came before some chronicling done by Steve Lyons. So this is where a lot of the information comes in from. Like, for example, Colonel Jurgen was given the order to stop Krieg from leaving the Imperium by the Inquisition. So yeah,
Okay.
There's that. After being tortured and severely,
Wait, they tortured him?
Yes, to make
Why?
100% sure that he was not a traitor to begin with.
Hooray, the Inquisition.
It's the Inquisition, yeah. And so they sent him back. He gets back there.
Hang on a second. I don't know. I might just, after they're done torturing me, after I got back to the planet, go, you know what? Screw those guys. Maybe I will turn traitor.
Of course, on the other hand, he has been fighting in the Imperial Guard. So he probably knows that even if the planet did turn, there is the entire Imperial Guard that could just swamp them.
I don't know. I understand that, but I'm just saying out of spite by that point anyways. It's like you came anyways. You're like, hey, I'm the only guy that's been here anyways helping you guys out. And they go, cool. Now I want you to sit in this chair and we're going to rip off all of your fingernails just to make sure that you're really on board. What?
Well, it's him and the 83rd Regiment.
So they tortured his guys too.
No,
great.
They tortured him.
Oh, okay. So it's so dumb. It's so backwards thinking. Sorry, go ahead.
It's so Imperium.
No, it's so Inquisition.
So he goes back. He tries, first of all, the political method, You shouldn't do this. This is a stupid idea. You'll come back and crush us. We should hold true to the faith. Then they try to stop him from actually leaving the capital, and he ends up taking over Ferrograd as the last remaining place that goes, we will stand for the Imperium. So, at this point, they have all of Krieg going against one city, and he doesn't have any way to reach out to the Astra Militarum because they had, obviously, when they had chosen independence, cut off all communication. And so he had a tech priest come across when they were digging bunkers. He came across some atomic weapons. Yay! And so it came to the point where it's either I could try to nuke them to death, or we all die, and then they die. Which should be chosen?
This sounds more like spite than anything else. You're not going to beat me. I'm going to just blow up the planet just to spite you.
Well, they had built these bunkers, so you knew at least the majority of the city was going to survive.
Still, you can't have the planet. If I can't have the planet, no one can have the planet. Kaboom. Push the button.
And so
that Inquisition really got into his head. I mean, they're the guys that do Exterminatus. It's probably what gave him the idea.
He's probably thinking, I'm going to save the couple thousand that are actually loyal and just leave everybody else to rot and decay. And
well, it's still okay. So it's still a hive city, though, right? So I mean, millions of people live there.
Not so much by the time he decided to launch the.
Oh, so it really was out of spite. Okay,
they really were. They really did start off trying to fight them off, but then it came down to that point where it's more and more pressure is being put on. It's yeah, there's no way we're getting out of this.
Anyways, so he bombs the planet.
And then they have the Civil War. Before he dies, he talks with the Adeptus Tech that originally found the nukes. And the tech's just we should employ the Vitawomb. Which, this is about all we know of the Vitawomb. Yes, it helps the production of more people.
AKA, it's a cloning machine.
Cloning or basically vat-produced people.
It's a cloning machine. It's just the concept of how far they go with their cloning process is kind of up to debate. Like you said, anyways, maybe it's more vat babies than it is like what we saw in Terran 42 Star Wars Attack of the Clones. But it's a cloning mechanism. Sucks. But I'll talk about that here in a minute. But go ahead. Finish up.
He ended up dying from an illness, actually, and then the tech person said, yeah, he said it was okay to use this.
Even though for a car, he said, no, we're not using the cloning machine. The guy's like, fine. And then he dies. He goes, guess what? Turgut said we can use the cloning machine.
Yeah.
Change his mind right at the end bit.
And so the way that the story goes is actually starts from the first time that they get in contact with the Astra Militarum, which is
the
interesting story.
Lions.
The Inquisitor that actually goes down to the planet ends up dying because they didn't protect themselves well enough, and that atmosphere killed him. Yay!
Oh, I feel so bad for him. Poor Inquisition guy.
But a somewhat background thing about it is the person who is a representative referred to himself as Colonel Jerton.
So you're saying is that there's more than one of them, or they're just using that name anyways as a benchmark for who's in charge?
It is, I believe, more of a benchmark of who's in charge.
So that's a pretty high honor.
Yeah.
For the guy that bombed his own planet.
Well, to be honest, if you think about it, though, he is the only officer that was around at the time that said, yeah, let's follow what we should be doing.
No, I'm just thinking about it like later on in the centuries. It's like taking the rank of Colonel Jurgen. It's like, oh, it must be a high honor. What did he do to gain such a high honor? Oh, he nuked his own planet. What? Trying to explain this to somebody else, from a different regiment. So the guy in charge is called Colonel Jurgen because it's in honor of the guy that nukes your planet. Yeah. What? That doesn't make any sense. Well, you weren't there. Okay. I think we do got to move on, but I will get back to the womb thing. That just kind of irritates me to no end. But yeah, go ahead. Tell us about the rest of the Krieg.
Okay. These warriors that advance in great coat and vapor masks through the rad wastes and blasted cities of Krieg would become known as the Death Korps, existing only to endure the hellish planetary surface in order to do their duty and to kill in the Emperor's name. During the next 500 years, the people of Krieg have not sat idle, as beneath the blasted exterior of their world, entire subterranean cities had been founded. Tens of thousands of miles of bunkers and passageways dug, and a vast underworld of industry and manufacture geared specifically to the production of arms and equipment. But most of all, to the production of soldiers who proved to be implacable as the factory lines that armed them, and as pitiless as their blasted radioactive world. The deployment of the regiments from the Death Korps of Krieg were immediately successful, despite the misgivings of some of the regiments they served alongside. In war zones that mirrored the horrific state of their homeworlds, the Death Korps regiments proved superior to other extramilitary regiments. On worlds that were radioactive waste toxic zones and polluted ash worlds, Imperial Guard generals quickly capitalized on deploying the Death Korps on such worlds. Stalemates were broken and advances achieved that otherwise would have required the massive expenditure of penal legion troops or the use of valuable elite forces such as the Adeptus Astartes. The Krieg have gained a reputation for their grim attitude and uncompromising nature, disdainful of retreat or surrender, and fighting without fear or death. The soldiers of Krieg seem to have no regard for their own lives. Indeed, the prevailing attitude amongst the Krieg is that they are little more than living weapons for the Emperor's will, faceless and infinitely replaceable behind their anonymous rebreather masks, and they hold self-sacrifice as the highest of ideals. Few other regiments feel entirely comfortable alongside the Krieg, with morale issues often arising as a result. Commissars assigned to Krieg regiments are not required to maintain order and zeal, as is normally the case, but rather to ease interaction between Krieg and non-Krieg regiments and actually work to curb the self-sacrificial tendencies of their charges. Recruitment starts almost from birth, or some would say incubation, and the ability to withstand the hardships of living on an atomic-blasted world is enhanced further with brutal training designed to quickly weed out the weak and unworthy. Mental conditioning is a key part of a Krieg recruit's training, their minds purposely broken and remade stronger. Absolute faith in the Emperor is installed at an early age, amplifying pre-existing cultural norms regarding honor and self-sacrifice to create what the ecclesiarchy calls a cult of sacrifice. This mental conditioning also emphasizes their role as an element in the greater picture, a pebble in the avalanche which will crush the enemies of the Emperor. As individuals, they do not matter, which is why medals and other awards are unheard of in Krieg regiments, especially since bravery and heroism is to be expected. Rates of injury and fatality during training are high, and as a final test, all recruits are forced to endure the surface of Krieg itself, performing maneuvers and fighting mock battles amidst the nuclear-blasted battlefields that cover their world. Only those who survive this final phase of training become members of the Death Korps. The resulting guardsmen are highly disciplined and self-sufficient soldiers, proficient in all basic Imperial Guard weaponry type, with exemplary hand-to-hand skills and expertise in construction of trenchworks. Accuracy is desirable, but ultimately secondary to the importance of the fire discipline and the ability to maintain continuous fire en masse as part of a larger formation. Compared to other worlds with an aristocratic military tradition, Krieg officers are drawn from the rank and file, achieving promotion through skill, seniority, in many cases, simply survival. If selected during basic training, potential officers must complete an additional training course, with most of those being selected having already been chosen for Death Rider duty. In the field, new officers are promoted from the ranks, typically having served as watchmasters or within Death Rider squadrons. Officers right up to the regimental level typically fight on the front lines and equip themselves as such, an expression of the Krieg mentality that all guardsmen must fight and die for the Emperor. Also in keeping with this mentality, these officers regard their men in the same way other commanders regard ammunition, a mentality which has often caused problems in cases where non-Krieg units are placed under the command of Krieg officers. Sustained artillery barrages precede massive infantry attacks, human waves of guardsmen led by squads of grenadiers, advancing in dispersed formations before closing ranks to unleash disciplined volleys of last fire and storm the enemy's defenses and placements. Heavy weapon squads are concentrated in separate detachments so that their deployment will not stagger the advance of infantry units, and are used to support and protect their flanks as well as shore up defenses around important strategic locations. Vehicles used by Krieg siege regiments are either purpose-built or heavily modified for use on difficult terrain and prolonged exposure to environmental damage, with relatively light vehicles such as Chimera replaced in favor of more robust transport. Field artillery and heavy artillery companies feature heavily in siege regiments, the former providing direct support to the infantry while the latter concentrate on tasks such as box barrages, counter battery, harassing, and destructive firing. When operating as part of a larger siege army, the regiment's artillery can be further supported by the bombardment corps, large concentrations of artillery to back up the attacking regiment during major offensives. Tanks in siege regiments are not fielded en masse, but partitioned out to support the infantry assault, with individual companies and squadrons attached to infantry platoons to provide physical cover and supporting fire as they cross no man's land. While others regard this as backwards and unsophisticated use of armor, Krieg commanders regard the high loss rate of these vehicles with the same callousness they show towards human casualties. Besides these formations, Krieg produces many different types of regiments, including infantry, mechanized infantry, and tank regiments. All types exhibit the Krieg traits of discipline, expertise in trench warfare, and tolerance of both hazardous environments and high attrition rates. These traits can manifest themselves in unhelpful fashions, though. For example, unless explicitly ordered to do so, a Krieg unit will continue to fight against an overwhelming foe until destroyed, even when retreat would be more tactically sound.
No doubt because the clones are manufactured that way.
We'll get to that later. Typical Krieg zeal,
aka manufactured zeal,
maybe, for engaging and destroying the enemy at any cost can sometimes earn short-term victories at the expense of long-term strategic goals, and their unique outlook on life has been known to cause friction between themselves and other non-Krieg units. For this reason, commissars, the only non-Krieg members of the Death Korps regiment, are present less to enforce the law and improve morale than to rein in the excesses of their unit and act as technical advisors to its officers, reminding them of the larger strategic picture, as well as providing liaison duties between regimental commands when needed. They can be counted on over most other regiments to hold their ground and when advancing prefer a massive offensive or an extended front with a rolling barrage of artillery support. Many Krieg regiments are adept raiders of entrenched positions should a massed offensive be impractical or require the softening up of enemy positions before any such offensive can take place. The fact that the Death Korps of Krieg are known for unconditional loyalty and ruthlessness in prosecuting their wars mainly comes from the atomic purging that the 83rd Krieg Infantry, under the command of Colonel Jordan, inflicted on their own planet during the Krieg Civil War, an event that the Death Korps of Krieg in general and the 83rd Krieg Infantry Regiment in particular are deeply proud of. Now, one of the more notable regiments of the Krieg are the Death Riders.
Oh, I think I mentioned them a couple weeks ago.
You did indeed.
Ah,
Made
yeah.
as a Rough Rider cavalry unit that is found among numerous other Astra Militarum regiments from worlds where riding mounts are commonplace, the Death Riders of Krieg are one of the most justly famous of the unique formations found within the Krieg forces. The Death Riders of Krieg are also a direct result of the Krieg's century-long civil war. The most singular aspect is the nature of the Death Rider mounts, the legendary Krieg steed. That is a highly adaptable form of the original Terran horse.
Oh no. Are you saying they clone the horses too?
No, well, kinda.
Ah.
These animals are now the product of extreme genetic engineering tailored for strength, endurance, and aggression, with numerous additional bio-sculpted organs that allow them to survive in the most polluted and toxic battlefields unscathed. Vat grown on Krieg under the auspices of the Adeptus Mechanicus, the animals are further augmented with subdermal organic armor, osmotic lungs, and a fully integrated drug injection system rigged with a potent mixture of stimulants, pain blockers, and other palliatives. The end result is that the Krieg steed is capable of incredible levels of endurance and environment tolerance. Death Riders form a special cadre within the Krieg regiments, and their inductees are chosen not only on the grounds of aptitude, but also for independent thought and initiative. Many future Death Korps officers are drawn from the ranks of their survivors. Death Riders are equipped with a variety of sidearms and saber blades, in addition to the signature explosive tipped lance found in similar units. Now, the regular trooper wears a heavy greatcoat, which is the most distinctive part of Death Korps' uniform, a warm, waterproof coat made locally on Krieg of thick cloth in a variety of colors. Double-breasted with brass buttons, the greatcoat itself can provide limited protection, but is further reinforced against biological and chemical agents through a chemical impregnating process which gives it a pungent smell.
Like what?
Oil and promethium.
Oh.
Matching trousers are held close to the legs through leg bindings, while the standard issue low marching boots use hobnailed soles for grip and include an anti-vesicant dubbing kit, which can be rubbed into the seal against chemical attacks. The standard issue Mark IX helmet is made of plasteel and constructed to ensure a good fit around the gas mask. Ventilation is provided through a top spine, which has its own internal filter to keep out biological and chemical agents. Plasteel shoulder pads are buckled to the greatcoat and embossed with rank insignia in case of watchmasters and higher ranks. When worn together with the respirator, a Death Korps soldier in full uniform is completely sealed against any contaminated environment. Now, mind you, these are all tailor-made for each soldier, allowing for comfort and ruggedness. Now, you're probably wondering out of this army has been distinguished amongst his brothers, and that would be Marshal Keresvena.
Sure. But real quick, what is the rank of Marshal? And how does it fit in with the rest of the Imperial Guard?
Okay, so when it comes to Krieg, there are two different rankings that it holds. One would be around the level of a general, then the other is the more common one is the level of a colonel. So in most cases, when you refer to one, it's a colonel. But in some cases, they still identify they're like people that are in charge of multiple regiments as a marshal, just to make everything confusing for everybody.
It's as confusing as Bud said. Well, anyways, who is this Marshal
Keresvena? Yes.
What's that?
You mean clear as mud, right?
What did I say?
Confusing as mud.
Whatever. Same difference. Just tell us about this Marshal Keresvena, though. Who is he? What did he do?
Well, Marshal Keresvena, the thrice martyred, the castigator of Valtine, is a legendary figure within the Death Korps, a senior officer of single determination, which for many embodied the Death Korps' bloody determination and readiness to sacrifice all for the greater cause. Marshal Venner has led the 17th Line Corps for an unprecedented 11 years, during which he has always led from the front, personally leading the Corps' assault brigades on the field of battle. Much of his trachea and lungs have been replaced by augmatics after Venner was heavily burned by an enemy flamer during the siege of Durica Landing. Despite his wounds, Venner dragged his broken and bloodied figure back to Krieg's lines and was saved. This was the first time he was officially listed as a casualty, only to reappear almost miraculously, owing him the surname of Thrice Martyred. The second time was during a particular campaign. Venner's command had been cut off and was declared killed in action, only to be discovered 3 days later at the head of a ragged group of survivors, surrounded by the corpse of their enemy. This legend has made him very popular within those regiments that have served under him, but not so much within non-Krieg regiments that have been placed under his authority. Appointed commander-in-chief of both the 17th and 60th Line Corps during the Orphean War, Marshal Venner distinguished himself at the Battle of Amera Prime, where the Death Korps was one of the few Imperial formations not only to be able to resist, but also vanquish their Necron foe.
Well, there's a lot of things that I think of the regiment, and quite frankly, anyways, I used to like them a whole lot more than I do now. And that has to do with the Vita Womb. Now, I know that the Vita Womb in and of itself is pretty misleading, but to you, anyways, what do you think it is?
To me, I think it's kind of like cloning technology. Well, there's like, for example, Terran 42 Star Wars. It's like you clone one person a bazillion times. So you can have them be perfect.
So hang on a second. So you do think okay? So you probably agree with me on this. Then you think it is a cloning device of some sort.
It is. It could be cloning, or it could be some way. It's some way of rapidly reproducing the population. So cloning would be more likely, but the way it's set up is kind of like, since we also send out people that aren't clones, there has to be some sort of either fault with it, or it's not exactly exact. Let's just put it that way.
I wouldn't necessarily say there was a fault with it. I would think, and I agree with you. I think that there are a lot of the troops, anyways. I think that they use the Vita Womb as a supplement, and a lot of the troops are coming from the Vita Womb. But I do think that the people on Krieg are still producing the old-fashioned way. So I think that they're also supporting, anyways, with troops. So I think you probably got both sides of this, but the Vita Womb itself, anyways, I think so. Do you agree with me on the fact, anyways, that it is some sort of like cloning device? Now, what that all entails can vary, but the concept that it is a cloning device, would you agree with me on that?
In the loose term of cloning.
Okay. So you've got cloning, anyways, ranging all the way from we grow this thing in a petri dish.
Right.
And we use relative genetics, anyways, from an egg and sperm, anyways, and we mass produce something like that. Or you can, like, it ranges from that all the way up to, like what you said, anyways, Terran 42s, Star Wars Attack of the Clones, where they use Jango Fett's DNA to clone the clone troopers.
And I find that much less likely.
Okay. Just out of curiosity, why?
Well, first of all, why on earth would they send some of their own then?
To continue with the quota. I mean,
and
okay, so the quota
just cranking them out.
Well, their tithing, anyways, is like what? They send 20 regiments each tithe, something like that.
Well, it's a ridiculous amount. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, to me, anyways, it would seem, anyways, that to keep that quota up, anyways, I mean, you'd be throwing everybody you possibly could at it, including cloning as many people as you can.
Right.
So, what you said, okay, so I think I understand what you're saying is that because if it was all the way up to the Attack of the Clones concept, then you could just mass produce these things like every 5 years. So why would you be sending
them, and then you wouldn't have to send any of your own people?
Right, exactly. Okay. So you think, anyways, that it's probably farther back than that because it would take longer, anyways, to produce these things, like say 20 years or 18?
I think it's hard because they keep it very vague. They also keep it where when they do talk about it, it seems to be not specific on how well it's built or it operates.
Well, it wouldn't shock me if this is something from back from the age of technology.
Yeah, which means they
Trying
don't
to
know
figure out
what
how to work.
half of what it's supposed to do.
Exactly. Hence why, anyways, the Adeptus Mechanicus, anyways, hates this thing.
Yeah, probably.
Now, mind you, anyways, from some of the stuff that I've read, it sounds like it was in the book that you talked about, Krieg by, what's his face? Lyons?
Lions.
Yeah, Steve Lyons, is that it kind of implements it sometimes, anyways, that some of the genetic code was specifically used from Colonel Jurgen in all the Krieg clones. Or what's that?
Jurgen.
Jurgen, sorry. Jurgen's Kane's boy.
Yeah.
But it's implied, I guess, but it's never actually completely stated in the book. So that is in and of itself kind of its own argument. But
the only implication of that is at some point somebody says, "My name is Colonel Churton." That's it.
Right. And we kind of discussed, the concept of maybe, anyways, that name, anyways, has become symbolic more than an actual, like person.
Especially since normally when they refer to people, they go by a code number plus their name. So it's like 0179234 whatever Drata. It's like, okay. Does he have a last name? No.
Okay, so this is, like I said, this is one of the concerns that I have with the Krieg. I did not realize before we started reading into these guys that the Krieg are pretty much clones. Now, the concept of how they're clones, anyways, it varies, but the majority of them are clones, and it, to me, anyways, that kind of takes away a lot of their character. To me, personally, I mean, other people might like the fact, anyways, that they're just this, mindless horde marching towards the enemy. But, I mean, to me, personally, it kind of takes away a lot of their character. Now, mind you, anyways, they are still, anyways, clones as opposed to, like, robots. Every person has a personality and they have a different concept of how they act and react to different things. But I mean, and they're still very much human, and
they seem to also age relatively the same as a normal human.
Okay. Which does beg the question, which would be, anyways, very much that concept of how the Vita Womb works. Because, like you said, anyways, if it was like the Attack of the Clones, well, they could keep coming out with fresh batches every 5 years. Because if I recall right, in Attack of the Clones, they super grow them up till about 5, and then they're like adults, and then they kind of, and then their aging process slows down, which gets me, anyways, into my.
I'm not sure it actually slows down. I think they just figure they're going to die by the time they get to.
I think it kind of slows. Well, I don't know. That's Attack of the Clones. That's its own lore, but. Which does actually kind of, I mean, beg the question. So how much of these clones, anyways, do you think that they are genetically programming?
I don't think they are, or else they probably wouldn't need to go through nearly as much of the training mentally, of the mental training that they have to go through. Because, I mean, if you just go, oh, well, this person can be fearless, click. You don't need to go around and going, okay, I'm going to break this person's mind and build it back together so that he is fearless. Just would be sort of redundant.
Unless you're trying to build them into a troop so that they work better together. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why militaries break people down and then build them back up. It's not just simply, anyways, for the concept of morale and courage. It's also for following orders. It's also for other aspects like working together cohesively in a unit, or firing in the right direction. That's a very good one to learn, anyways, in the military. But let me put it this way: I haven't. I think this is a correct statement. I don't know what you've read, but have you read anything that is actually stated that they've genetically altered any of these people?
No,
I haven't either. But at the same time, it doesn't take too much of an imagination, anyways, to think that they could have. I mean, even something as simple as they're all the same size. I mean, just think about that for half a second. If they're all the same size, and what I mean by size is like height and, stuff like that, anyways, all that custom tailored greatcoats and stuff like that would be a whole lot easier, because they would all be, like size 9 boots and, a 34 waist, or whatever, kind of thing. That way they could even regiment it even more.
Well, the problem with that would be, though, is what if somebody grows more musculature than somebody else? It's things like that. The only thing you'd really be able to be 100% sure on is maybe the waist and the height.
Definitely. Well, the boot size.
Well, yeah.
You know how much the military spends on boots? I mean, it just, the concept anyways, that they just make the same size and that's all they have to worry about. I'm not saying that they do that with the Krieg, by the way. I'm just saying it wouldn't take, I don't think anyways, it takes that much of an imagination to figure that they could be playing with the genetics of the Krieg. Now, mind you, anyways, the one thing I think anyways that goes against that is what we already kind of talked about. This is probably something back from the age of technology. So the concept of how well they can use it, that, and it sounds like anyways, like you said anyways, they have problems figuring out a lot of this stuff and they can just barely get it to work.
Well, I think they found it around the same time that they found those wonderful bombs that were sitting there back from the dark age of technology or whatever.
So what I'm saying is that would they like to be able to genetically alter these people? Yeah, I bet they definitely would. Can they though? That's really the question. And that's what kind of breaks that, concept of, are they genetically altered? It's like, well, can they actually do it? From the sounds of it anyways, well, first off, from the sounds of it, this is all incredibly vague.
Yes.
The only things that we were pretty much sure on anyways is that the Vitawomb is some sort of cloning machine. And it gives them the ability to give 20 regimental units every tithe. That's about it. I mean, everything else anyways is kind of circumstantial. But like I said, it's just, I don't know, the aspect that they're just, the clone thing kind of takes my idealisms away from them anyways a little bit. But I mean, they still got the shovel, which I always found anyways entertaining. Trench tool. And they're what are they? The Death Riders?
Yeah.
The Death Riders and their horses look awesome. Now their horses though are genetically altered, right? There really is no argument on that, and they are clones. So that, and
well,
which by the way,
I wouldn't necessarily call them clones anymore by how much they genetically alter them, but yeah.
So I mean that one, anyways, we definitely know. So
yeah.
Yet again, anyways, another thing that kind of plays in the back of my mind is like, could they be genetically altering these guys? Yeah, if they knew how to. The question is, do they? In my opinion, but I don't know. You did a whole lot more research on the Krieg than I did.
Krieg?
You're the one that the Krieg. I don't know why. I know why I keep thinking Krieg. It's because it's spelled Krieg, which drives me nuts. It's I before E, except after C, and E before N in chicken. Anyways, you did a whole lot more research on these guys. What do you think of them?
I like them. I think that their mentality is very, very, we will not rely on emotion at all.
Like a mindless
we'll look at things logistically in comparison to, we shall run forth and claim for our brothers. No, it's, we'll do this job because we were brought to do this job. That's why.
That's one of the other downsides, I think, for me personally, I think of the Krieg, especially because they're so well trained. That is one of the things that I do like about them, is that they're very well trained.
Yeah.
But could you imagine how much better they would work anyways, instead of just the same mentality? Well, this isn't a Krieg problem. This is an Austromilitarum problem in general. It's just the concept of just more meat for the meat grinder. Just keep throwing, people in. And it's like, with the Austromilitarum units that aren't very well trained, go for it. They're meat shields. Yeah, I get it. But when you actually take the time to train a lot of these guys, or some of these guys, like for instance, the Krieg, or last week we talked about them, the Elysians and the Catechins, and all these different guys anyways that are considered very well trained. To me anyways, it makes more sense to use them tactically as opposed to just steamroller.
Yeah.
So part of me anyways, the Krieg just thinks anyways how great it would be if they actually had officers that really used them tactically.
Oh, another thing that I love is how their tank divisions, they have been known to be called panzer divisions. I love that.
Yes, they do.
Panzer divisions. Yes.
They do look like the Germans from World War One.
Yeah.
And on that note, we are out of time for today. For this segment. Now, mind you, anyways, we actually have also written a script for the Talon Desert Raiders. And if you're watching the premiere on YouTube, it'll be coming up here in the next couple of minutes. But for those that haven't, we are going to be talking about Talon and how it kind of molded the Desert Raiders. And that'll be coming up here in the next couple of minutes. And those that aren't listening, well, we'll have an intro for that as well. But for now, we are out of time.
But if you're still listening to this, then if you could be so kind as to push that subscribe, like, or follow button. If you wish to help us expand our work on 40k lore, by all means, support us by joining our membership program on our YouTube channel, Tales of Ashiraka.
Have a great day. And as always, until next time, this is Ekthar
And Yuxin.
signing off.